Every family has its secrets, the kind that stay buried beneath laughter, traditions, and old photographs. For years, Sarah believed her home was held together by love, the love she gave, the love she fought for, and the love she thought she received in return. But this Christmas, love would turn into silence. And silence would turn into truth. It began with one chair, an empty seat at the dining table that carried more weight than anyone dared to admit. To her, it was just a chair, a quiet reminder of her late husband. To her son, Ethan, it was something else entirely, a symbol of everything he had tried to forget. And when the family gathered that snowy evening, a single sentence shattered the illusion of peace. "Mom, that chair isn't for Dad anymore. It's for Grandpa." What followed wasn't just a dinner gone wrong, it was the unraveling of a lifetime of guilt, grief, and buried love. Because sometimes, the people you hold closest are the ones who wound you deepest. And this Christmas, Sarah would finally discover the truth about the seat no one dared to touch. The first Christmas without him was quiet, but the year that followed was quieter still, the kind of quiet that doesn't feel peaceful, just empty. I used to think grief was loud, crying into pillows, breaking down at anniversaries, saying his name into the dark just to feel it echo back. But grief, I've learned, is polite. It sits at the table, eats from your plate, and says nothing while you pretend you can still taste joy. This December, the world outside was draped in gold. The town square twinkled with lights and the smell of roasted chestnuts drifted through the frosted air. But inside my house, the light bulbs flickered like old memories trying to stay alive. The dining room looked the same as it always had, the same oak table, the same lace runner he once said looked too delicate to survive dinner. His chair still stood at the head, as if waiting. I kept it that way out of habit, or maybe faith. Every year since he passed, Ethan, my only son, had taken that spot, not out of arrogance but reverence. This year, though, I had a feeling things were going to shift. A doorbell broke the silence. 3 sharp rings, impatient, familiar. I wiped my hands on my apron and opened the door. There he was, Ethan, handsome in that rushed, grown-up way. The kind of man who worked too much and smiled too little. His wife, Rachel, stood beside him, picture-perfect as always. Her lipstick matched the wine she carried, her coat shimmered faintly under the porch light. Behind them, the children darted in, bundled in red scarves and laughter. "Mom." Ethan's voice had the same crack it did when he was 10. He hugged me hard. "It smells amazing in here." "I'm glad you came early," I said, brushing snow from his shoulders. "I wanted you to help with the tree." He smiled but didn't meet my eyes. "Actually, Rachel handled the decorations this year, didn't you, honey?" Rachel's smile was polite, the kind you give when you don't intend to answer. "We brought a few things from our place. I thought it might be nice to update the look." Update. That word landed heavy. My home had never needed an update. It was built with memories, not design trends. I forced a laugh. "Of course, dear. You always had good taste." She kissed my cheek, a quick, cold gesture, and slipped past me. Ethan followed. Their perfume and cologne lingered like uninvited guests. The house came alive again, the children running down the hall, the TV flashing a holiday special, Rachel arranging her glass ornaments where my paper angels used to hang. I tried not to mind. I told myself that Christmas was about sharing, about letting the next generation add their touch. But every time she replaced something of mine, a candle, a table runner, even the old stockings I'd kept for decades, I felt a quiet ache bloom beneath my ribs. When I reached for the wooden star my husband had carved our first year together, Rachel gently took it from my hands. "Oh, that's sweet," she said, "but it doesn't match the theme this year." "The theme?" "Silver and pearl," she smiled. "Minimalist elegance." I wanted to tell her that Christmas wasn't supposed to be elegant, it was supposed to be messy, loud, full of burnt cookies and crooked stars. But I said nothing. I just watched her hang a shimmering ornament where the wooden star used to be. Later that afternoon, Ethan came into the kitchen. The smell of turkey and rosemary filled the air. I was basting the bird the way his father taught me, slow, patient, with care. "You don't have to do all this, Mom," he said, grabbing plates. "You could just relax this year." "I like doing it," I said. It makes me feel useful. He frowned. You're not supposed to feel useful, you're supposed to enjoy yourself. I smiled at him. Sometimes those are the same thing. He didn't understand, how could he? He hadn't lived through the kind of silence that follows after you've lost the one person who filled every room just by breathing. He turned off the oven light, then turned to me. By the way, Rachel's dad is joining us tonight. I hope that's okay. Oh. Yeah, it's last minute. His wife's away, and Rachel didn't want him to be alone. You don't mind, do you? My hand froze over the pan. Of course not, I said automatically. The more the merrier. But deep down, I did mind. Not because of him, I'd met Mr. Dalton twice. He was fine, in that overly confident way men sometimes are. But Christmas dinner wasn't a party to me. It was sacred. It was the one day I still felt my husband's presence in every corner of the house. That evening, the doorbell rang again. Rachel rushed to open it, her voice high and bright. Dad. You made it. Mr. Dalton entered, carrying a bottle of imported wine and the air of someone stepping into a space that didn't quite belong to him yet. He greeted everyone loudly, complimented the decor, his daughter's decor, of course, and handed me the wine with a practiced smile. Mrs. Clark, he said, shaking my hand. Thank you for having me. Rachel told me your Christmas dinners are legendary. I smiled tightly. Please, call me Helen. He looked around, his eyes landing on the table. Beautiful setup. Though I'll say, I haven't seen a photo at the table before. My stomach clenched. He was looking at the framed picture of my husband, right there at the head of the table, beside the empty chair. That's my late husband, I said, my voice softer now. He loved Christmas. It feels wrong not to save him a seat. Mr. Dalton chuckled lightly. Sentimental, I like that. Though I'm sure he'd rather see someone enjoying the spot than leaving it empty, huh? He said it casually, maybe even kindly. But the words slid under my skin like splinters. Before I could respond, Rachel stepped in smoothly. Dad, you can sit there tonight, she said, her tone light, like it was already decided. The room went still. My heart gave a slow, painful thud. Ethan glanced at me, then at Rachel, and I saw it, the hesitation, the guilt, the quiet pleading in his eyes. Mom, he began carefully, maybe it's okay if, I forced a smile that felt carved out of ice. Of course, I said before he could finish. It's just a chair. But it wasn't just a chair. It was my husband's seat, the last piece of him that still belonged to this table. I turned away before they could see the tears burning behind my eyes. The meal went on like nothing had happened. Laughter filled the room, glasses clinked, and the children sang out-of-tune carols. But every sound felt hollow. I watched as Mr. Dalton sat where my husband once sat, carving the turkey with clumsy hands, laughing too loud, drinking too much. Ethan smiled at his father-in-law, and I couldn't help but wonder, when did my son learn to replace sentiment with convenience? Halfway through dinner, I looked toward the photograph. It wasn't there. My chest tightened. I scanned the table, the counters, gone. Rachel noticed me looking. Oh, I put it aside earlier, she said lightly. It was blocking the centerpiece. I nodded slowly, gripping my fork until my knuckles turned white. Of course. Can't have the debt overshadowing the decor. The words slipped out before I could stop them. The room went quiet. Ethan's eyes darted to mine, a warning, a silent not now, Mom. I smiled again, the same practiced, brittle smile. It's fine, I said softly. Everything's fine. But it wasn't. And for the first time in my life, I realized something terrifying, maybe I had raised my son too well. He'd learned to be polite. To keep the peace. To let others take what mattered most, as long as everyone smiled through it. That night, as the laughter continued and the candles burned low, I sat in my chair, far from his, and thought about all the ways love can fade without ever being taken away. Sometimes it's not cruelty that hurts you most. It's kindness, when it comes at the cost of remembering who you are. The next morning, the house smelled of cinnamon and smoke, the leftovers of laughter I didn't feel part of. I woke before dawn, as I always did, to tidy what others left behind. Crumbs scattered across the table, wine stains on the runner, a fork lying where his chair used to be. I stared at that spot, the head of the table, empty now. The chair was pushed back, its cushion dented slightly where Mr. Dalton had sat the night before. For years, that seat was a symbol of presence. Now, it was a reminder of absence. I picked up the framed photo from where Rachel had placed it, near the cabinet, tucked behind a vase of fake lilies. Dust from last year still clung to its edges. I wiped it gently and whispered, "They moved you again, love." "I'm sorry." My husband's eyes in the photo had that same knowing kindness, as if even now, he understood more than I ever could. I placed it back on the table, right where it belonged, at the head. By the time the sun fully rose, the house was alive again. Ethan came downstairs in joggers, half asleep, scrolling through his phone. "Morning, Mom," he mumbled, grabbing coffee. "Morning," I said softly, without turning. "Did you sleep well?" "Yeah." "Rachel's still out, she had a headache from the wine." "Ah." I stirred the oatmeal slowly. "Your father could never handle red wine either. Used to make him fall asleep before dessert." Ethan smiled faintly but didn't look up. "Yeah, I remember." His tone was distant, polite, distracted. Like he was talking to a neighbor, not the woman who raised him. After a pause, he said, "Listen, Mom, about last night. I hope you're not upset about Dad's seat." I froze. "No," I lied. It was thoughtful of Rachel to invite her father. He exhaled, relieved. "Good. She just didn't want him alone. You know how she gets, she means well." I wanted to tell him that meaning well wasn't the same as doing right. That kindness can still wound, if it forgets where love once sat. But I didn't. I simply nodded, because mothers learn early that silence keeps the peace, even when it breaks the heart. Later that day, I found Rachel in the living room, redecorating. My husband's old record player was gone from the corner. So was the lamp we bought on our first Christmas together. "Where's the record player?" I asked, trying to sound casual. "Oh," she said brightly, "it didn't fit the vibe, so Ethan helped me move it to the garage. We brought a Bluetooth speaker, much more modern." The vibe. The word echoed like static in my mind. She gestured toward the mantel. "Don't you love it? Clean lines, less clutter. It's what makes a home feel fresh." I looked around. The walls were still mine, but the soul of the room wasn't. It was sterile, as if every memory had been bleached out for a magazine spread. "It's lovely," I murmured. And maybe it was, objectively. But it wasn't home. That afternoon, Ethan suggested they all go out, ice skating at the lake. "Come with us, Mom," he said, pulling on his gloves. I smiled. "I'll stay here. Someone has to keep the cocoa warm." He kissed my forehead, the way he used to before school. "You sure?" "Yes. Go make memories with your kids. That's what matters." He smiled, unaware of how much that sentence hurt me, because memories, in our family, were now made without me. When the door closed, I finally let myself cry, not from anger, but from a quiet, exhausted kind of grief. I walked through each room like a stranger, touching the back of the couch, the worn banister, the chipped paint on the kitchen door. Everything held pieces of the life we'd built, and pieces of me, slowly fading with every update Rachel made. I made cocoa, then stood by the window, watching the snow drift down in lazy spirals. The street looked peaceful. Families passed by with sleds, children shouting joy. I used to love that sound. Then, through the blur of snow, I saw something: Ethan, laughing as he spun his daughter on the ice. Rachel beside him, holding his arm. Their joy was radiant, untouched by the sadness that hung in my chest. I wanted to be happy for him. I really did. But a thought crept in, one I never dared speak aloud. When did I stop belonging to my own family? That evening, they returned, loud and glowing from the cold. The kids were red-cheeked, Rachel radiant, Ethan humming under his breath. "Mom, you should have come," Rachel said, shaking snow from her coat. "Ethan was amazing, he even taught Mia to spin." I smiled politely. That's wonderful. She turned to her husband, teasingly. I told you we should do Christmas at our place next year. It's bigger, easier for everyone. Ethan chuckled. Maybe. We'll see. My chest tightened, though I didn't show it. Next year. That phrase used to mean comfort, another chance, another season of family. Now it sounded like eviction. After dinner, I tucked the kids into bed. Mia handed me a crayon drawing, our family, standing under a tree. Who's this? I asked, pointing to a tall figure beside me. That's Grandpa, she said cheerfully. Mommy said he's watching from heaven. But I wanted him here too. Tears pricked my eyes. That's beautiful, sweetheart. Then she frowned. But Grandpa's chair isn't here anymore. Mommy said it's for Grandpa Dalton now. Did the other Grandpa go away? My throat burned. No, love, I whispered. He's just sitting somewhere else for now. She nodded, satisfied, and drifted off. Downstairs, I lingered by the table. The lights were dim. The photo still stood at the head, my quiet rebellion. Ethan came in, rubbing his neck. You're up late. Just cleaning, I said. He hesitated. Mom. I know change is hard, but Rachel's just trying to make everyone comfortable. I looked at him, really looked. My boy. The child who once clung to my leg, who cried when I left the room, who swore he'd always protect me. And now he was explaining my own home to me, as if I were a guest. I understand, I said softly. She wants things her way. That's fair. He sighed, relieved. Thank you. I knew you'd see it that way. But I didn't. And the truth settled deep in my bones, the kind of truth that's both cold and clear. I had become invisible in the home I once built. That night, I couldn't sleep. The wind howled outside, carrying faint dingles from a distant house. I got up, wrapped in my robe, and wandered to the living room. The tree stood there, elegant, perfect, soulless. Silver and pearl. I stared at it for a long time, until the ornaments blurred into ghosts of memories. Then, on impulse, I went to the attic. Dust and shadows greeted me. Boxes of forgotten Christmases lined the walls, old ornaments, crumpled garlands, our original star. I opened one box and found the wooden star my husband had carved decades ago. It was simple, uneven, one point slightly chipped, but it was ours. Holding it, I felt him again, his laughter, his warmth, his steady hands. I whispered, they can redecorate the house, but not the heart. Quietly, I went downstairs and replaced the pearl ornament on the top of the tree with our wooden star. It didn't match the theme. But it matched us. For the first time in days, I smiled. The next morning, Rachel's voice pierced the calm. Ethan. Did you change the tree? The top ornament, it's that thing again. Ethan looked confused. What thing? She pointed. That old wooden star. It ruins the look. Before I could speak, Ethan turned to me. Mom? I straightened. Yes. I put it there. Rachel's smile was sharp. I see. Well, I suppose some traditions die hard. Not all of them, I said quietly. Some are worth saving. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Rachel shrugged and walked off, muttering something about aesthetic consistency. Ethan stayed silent, caught between guilt and love. I turned away, but I could feel it, something shifting in the air. The fragile balance between mother and son, between memory and modernity, between keeping peace and keeping self. And though I didn't yet know it, that small act, placing that star, was the first spark in a fire that would soon burn through everything we thought we understood about family, loyalty, and love. It started with laughter, the kind that fills a room before it breaks it. That evening, the house glowed again with Christmas lights, the faint hum of conversation, and the crackle of firewood. The dinner was smaller this time, just us, the kids tucked upstairs watching cartoons while the adults lingered at the table. Rachel had opened another bottle of wine, and her father was halfway through telling a story about a business trip gone wrong. Ethan laughed too loudly, Rachel pretended it was still funny. I sat at the end of the table, my hands wrapped around a cup of tea that had long gone cold. It all looked perfect, like a family from a holiday card. But underneath the smiles, something was shifting. Rachel's voice carried across the room. You know, Ethan, I was thinking next year we might not do the big dinner here. It's so much work for your mom. She turned to me, her tone sugary. You shouldn't strain yourself, Helen. You deserve to just enjoy the holidays. My heart pinched. I don't mind the work, I said softly. I've always loved hosting. Rachel smiled politely. Of course, but times change. It's about making new traditions, right? Mr. Dalton chuckled. Exactly. And Rachel's place has a great dining area, perfect for entertaining. Ethan nodded. Maybe that's not a bad idea. The word stung sharper than I expected. Not because of the dinner, but because it wasn't about the dinner. It was about what it meant. My home had always been the center of our Christmas, where every laugh, every fight, every memory lived. And suddenly, I was being told gently that it was no longer needed. That I was no longer needed. I tried to stay calm, but my voice trembled. It's not about the size of the dining room. It's about who's in it. Rachel's smile faltered. Of course, Helen, but change can be good. You've had your traditions for decades, we'd just like to start ours. Start yours, I repeated quietly, by ending mine? The silence that followed was heavy, almost sacred in its discomfort. Ethan sighed, rubbing his forehead. Mom, please don't take it personally. I let out a brittle laugh. How else am I supposed to take it, Ethan? Rachel reached for the wine glass again. You're overthinking this. We just want things to be easier. Easier, I said, isn't always better. Mr. Dalton, perhaps trying to diffuse the tension, chuckled. You're sentimental, Helen. Nothing wrong with that. But the young ones like to move forward. Can't live in the past forever. Something inside me snapped, quietly, like the sound of thin ice cracking underfoot. I looked at the photo of my husband at the head of the table, that same frame, faintly catching the firelight. His eyes seemed to hold mine, steady, reminding me who I was before I began shrinking myself to fit into their version of family. You're right, I said softly. You can't live in the past. But you also can't build a future on forgetting. The air thickened. Ethan's voice came low, warning. Mom, no, I said, shaking my head, my voice trembling now. You can't keep replacing everything that reminds you where you came from. Not the chair. Not the ornaments. Not even your father's picture. You think that's progress? Rachel's face hardened. It's not about replacing anyone. It's about growing. Evolving. By erasing? She leaned forward. You're making this harder than it needs to be. I stood up slowly, my heart pounding. And you've made my home unrecognizable. Ethan rose too. Mom, please. Don't Mom, please me, Ethan. The words came out louder than I meant them to. Do you know how it feels to be treated like a guest in the life you built? To be told your love is outdated? Your memories cluttered? Your husband's presence inconvenient? Tears burned behind my eyes. You're my son. I raised you with love, with tradition, with meaning. I didn't raise you to replace me the second someone wanted a cleaner look. The room was still except for the hiss of the fire. Then, suddenly, a sharp sound. The frame. The picture of my husband had slipped from its place, landing face down on the floor with a dull crack. The glass split down the middle, cutting right across his smile. The silence that followed was absolute. Rachel flinched. Oh, it fell, I'll get it, don't touch it, I said sharply. She froze. I knelt down, my hands trembling as I lifted the frame. The split glass reflected my face, old, tired, raw. Something inside me gave way, not anger, not sorrow, something deeper. A breaking open. I looked up at Ethan. That's what happens when you keep shifting the foundations of a home. Eventually, something falls. He stared at me, guilt etched deep in his expression, but silence held him captive. Mr. Dalton cleared his throat. It's just a picture, Helen. My voice turned to ice. It's not just a picture. It's a promise. One you've all forgotten. I stood, holding the cracked frame close to my chest. Dinner's over. Rachel blinked. Excuse me? You've had your meal, your wine, your updates. Now I'd like some quiet in my house. Ethan stepped forward. Mom, you're being unreasonable. No, I whispered. For the first time in a long while, I'm being honest. I walked to the hallway, past the twinkling tree and the empty stockings, and set the photo carefully back on the mantel, cracks and all. Then I turned off the lights in the dining room. One by one, the sounds faded, chairs scraping, coats rustling, Rachel's muttered words about drama. When the front door closed behind them, I stood there in the dark, the only light coming from the flicker of the dying fire. It was hours before Ethan came back in alone. His face looked older, strained. Mom, he said softly, I'm sorry. She didn't mean to upset you. I didn't look up. But she did. And you let her. He exhaled shakily. I just wanted everyone to get along. And did we? He was quiet. Then he said, almost pleading, why can't we just move on? I turned to him, my voice breaking. Because moving on for you means leaving me behind. He closed his eyes. That's not true. Then tell me, I whispered, stepping closer, when you look at this house, do you see home, or just a place that used to belong to someone you loved? He couldn't answer. That silence said everything. He left again that night, and I didn't stop him. I watched his taillights disappear into the snow. The house sank into stillness, heavy and cold. But something new stirred in me, not bitterness, not self-pity, resolve. I had spent years keeping things alive for everyone else, the memories, the warmth, the traditions. But maybe it was time to stop waiting for them to remember me. Maybe I needed to remember myself. The next morning, I packed a small box. The cracked photo. The wooden star. A handful of ornaments my husband had touched. Then I walked outside, into the pale winter light. The snow glistened like glass, untouched and pure. For the first time in years, I didn't feel invisible. Because grief had taken so much, but not everything. It hadn't taken my courage. It hadn't taken my love. And love, I realized, isn't something you protect by holding on. Sometimes, it's what you rediscover when you finally let go. The house looked perfect from the outside that evening, golden lights wrapped around the porch, a glowing wreath on the door, snowflakes melting softly on the steps. But inside, the air was cold. Not from the weather, from silence. The kind of silence that follows words that can't be unsaid. I sat at the edge of the living room sofa, my hands trembling slightly as I smoothed the tablecloth one more time. Christmas dinner was ready, the smell of roasted turkey and baked cinnamon filled the air. Everything looked the same as every year, but everything felt different. Mom, you don't have to keep pretending everything's okay. Daniel's voice broke the silence from the dining table. I looked up at my son. His tone was calm, but his eyes, those same hazel eyes that once lit up every time he saw me, were heavy, guarded. Dad's gone. You can stop acting like he's just late. His words hit me harder than I expected. I'd known they were coming. I'd felt the distance. But hearing them, it was like something inside me cracked. I'm not pretending, I said softly. I'm holding this family together, because someone has to. Daniel sighed, pushing his chair back. That's just it, Mom. You're holding on to something that's already gone. You think Dad's absence means you failed. But it doesn't. I wanted to respond, to tell him he didn't understand what it was like to lose not just a husband, but a best friend, a partner, a history. But before I could speak, I heard footsteps on the stairs. It was Emma, his wife. She came down wearing a red sweater, her hair tied neatly, her hand resting protectively on her growing belly. Dinner smells wonderful, Mrs. Reynolds, she said politely, trying to sound cheerful. Mrs. Reynolds. Not Mom. It stung every time she called me that. It was her way of setting a boundary, a polite wall that reminded me I no longer had a place in Daniel's inner circle. I forced a smile. Thank you, dear. I hope you like cranberry sauce. She nodded and began setting plates, her movements precise and distant. Every sound, the clinking of forks, the scrape of a chair, seemed to echo in the hollow space between us. Then came the sound that shattered the fragile calm, a knock on the door. 3 firm knocks. Familiar. Measured. I froze. Daniel's head turned toward the door, his brows furrowed. Is someone else coming? My throat went dry. It's probably just a delivery. But it wasn't. When I opened the door, my heart stopped. Standing there, in the freezing night air, was my father-in-law, George Reynolds. My late husband's father. The man who had blamed me for everything since the funeral. He looked older, smaller, wrapped in a long coat dusted with snow. But his eyes, sharp and gray, still carried the same judgment. Evelyn, he said coldly. I wasn't sure I'd be welcome. I swallowed hard. You're always welcome here. That was a lie. We both knew it. But it was Christmas. As I helped him take off his coat, I saw Daniel watching us from across the room, a mix of surprise and unease flickering across his face. Emma's hand gripped his arm gently, whispering something under her breath. When we all sat down at the table, the tension was thick enough to taste. George sat opposite me, the same seat my husband used to take. The space between us felt like a grave. So, George began, his voice cutting through the quiet. This was his chair, wasn't it? I nodded slowly. Yes. I kept it open every year. He gave a bitter laugh. Open for a ghost. You always did love your gestures. Daniel's fork clinked against his plate. Grandpa, no, George interrupted. Let's speak plainly. Your mother spent years pretending everything was fine. Pretending she didn't drive him away with her expectations and her pride. I felt the color drain from my face. That's not true. He leaned forward. Isn't it? You couldn't accept that he was struggling. You wanted the perfect husband. The perfect family. And when he couldn't be that, you broke him. The words cut deep, because part of me, the darkest, most guilt-ridden part, wondered if he was right. Daniel slammed his palm on the table. Enough. You don't know what happened between them. George turned his piercing gaze toward him. Don't I? You think he called me the night before he died for no reason? The room went still. Emma's hand froze midair, her fork trembling. Daniel's face went pale. I felt my heart stop. What did you say? George exhaled slowly. He called me that night. He said he couldn't do it anymore. He said he felt trapped, that the house didn't feel like home anymore. Tears welled up in my eyes. My breath came shallow. The edges of the room blurred. That's not fair, I whispered. He was sick. He was lost. Don't you dare blame that on love. George's eyes softened, just for a moment, then hardened again. I'm not blaming love, Evelyn. I'm blaming silence. You both were too proud to speak honestly. The table was quiet. Even the fire crackled softly, as if afraid to break the moment. Daniel reached for my hand. Mom, he said gently, you don't have to carry this anymore. But I couldn't speak. The weight of George's words, and the truth beneath them, pressed on my chest like a stone. Every memory of laughter, every argument, every I'll be fine, came flooding back. Christmas lights blinked softly in the corner, casting fleeting shadows across our faces. And in that fragile light, I realized, this wasn't just a family dinner. It was a reckoning. For years, I had clung to the memory of my husband as a saint, perfect, misunderstood, gone too soon. But maybe what we both needed, even in death, was honesty. Still, I wasn't ready. Not yet. I lifted my glass, forcing a trembling smile. To family, I said. Even the broken kind. Daniel raised his glass hesitantly. Emma followed. George's hand stayed still for a long moment, then, finally, he lifted his too. The sound of the clinking glasses was soft, but it carried the weight of 1,000 unsaid things. And just as I thought we had found a fragile piece, Daniel looked at me, eyes glassy, voice shaking, and said something that changed everything. Mom, he whispered, there's something you need to know about Dad's last night. Mom, Daniel said quietly, his voice trembling. There's something I never told you about Dad's last night. The room froze. Even the crackle of the fire seemed to die in the silence that followed. My fingers clenched around the edge of the tablecloth. I could hear my own heartbeat, slow, heavy, like the ticking of a clock counting down to something I wasn't ready for. What do you mean? I asked, barely whispering. Daniel swallowed hard, glancing at his wife. Emma's eyes were filled with worry, but she nodded, urging him to continue. He took a deep breath. Dad didn't drive off that night because of work, or because he needed air. He came to see me. The air left my lungs. What? Daniel's gaze met mine, and in that look was years of buried guilt. He showed up at my apartment, Mom. It was late. He said he needed to talk. He looked, Daniel's voice cracked. He looked tired. Like he'd been carrying the world on his shoulders. I felt my whole body go cold. Why didn't you ever tell me this? Because I didn't know what to do, he burst out, standing up from his chair. His voice echoed through the room. He said he was thinking of leaving, of taking time away from everything. He said he couldn't breathe in the house anymore, that every room felt like a reminder of the man he used to be. Tears welled up in my eyes. My throat burned. Leaving? I whispered. He wanted to leave us? Daniel nodded, his voice breaking. He said he loved you, but he didn't know how to talk to you anymore. He said you were both pretending to be fine, and that pretending was killing him. A sharp, broken sound escaped my lips. I had spent years wondering why he drove away that night, why the car went off the icy road, why fate was so cruel. And now, suddenly, it wasn't fate. It was choice. Pain. Silence. He left, I said slowly, the words tasting like ash. He left because of me. No, Daniel said quickly, tears streaming down his face. He left because he was lost. Because neither of you knew how to ask for help. But I wasn't listening anymore. My eyes blurred as I looked toward the empty chair, his chair, across the table. For years I had kept it open as a symbol of love. Now it felt like a monument to my failure. George leaned forward, his voice softer now. Evelyn, but I couldn't hear him. The room was spinning. Every Christmas, every fight, every word I'd swallowed to keep the peace came crashing down at once. I stood, stumbling slightly as the floor seemed to tilt beneath me. I told him I needed space that night, I whispered. I told him to go clear his head. I thought he just needed a drive. I didn't think, my voice broke completely. I didn't think that would be the last thing I ever said to him. Daniel came around the table, catching me as my knees gave out. Mom, please, I shook my head, sobbing. He thought I didn't love him enough. That I'd stopped caring. No, Daniel said firmly, gripping my shoulders. He knew you loved him. He said so that night. He told me, your mother's stronger than she knows. She'll be fine without me. Daniel's voice cracked on the last words. He didn't mean to leave forever. He just never made it back. For a long, unbearable moment, there was only the sound of our breathing, broken, uneven, human. The lights flickered softly. Snow tapped gently against the window, a cruel contrast to the storm inside. Emma got up quietly and placed her hand on Daniel's back, tears streaming down her face. You both have been carrying his ghost for so long, she whispered. Maybe it's time to let him rest. But it wasn't that simple. Guilt doesn't die easily. George stood slowly, his face pale, his eyes glassy. For the first time, he looked old, not angry, not judgmental, just tired. I blamed you, Evelyn, he said, his voice shaking. I told myself you drove him away. It was easier than admitting my son couldn't carry the weight I put on him. He always wanted to be perfect, for me, for you, for everyone. I stared at him, shocked. He looked down at the table, his hands trembling. I made him believe love meant never failing. And when he did fail, he thought he didn't deserve it anymore. The words hung heavy in the air, like smoke. For the first time in years, I saw not a villain in George, but a father mourning his own reflection in his son's mistakes. We all stood there, four people bound by grief, trapped in the wreckage of silence. And then, quietly, Daniel said the words that would change everything. "Mom." I named my son after him. I blinked through tears. "What?" Emma smiled softly through her sobs. "We were going to tell you tonight. His name will be Michael." For a moment, time stopped. The name, Michael, filled the air like a prayer. My husband's name. The man whose absence had defined every Christmas since. It was as if he was here, not in guilt, not in pain, but in love. And suddenly, all I could feel was warmth. A small, fragile warmth that had been buried under years of sorrow. I walked over to Daniel and touched his cheek. "You're giving him a second life," I whispered. He nodded, tears streaming freely now. "And maybe giving us a second chance too." We all stood there, no words left, no apologies needed, just the shared ache of people who had finally said what should have been said long ago. Outside, the snow fell heavier, but inside, something lifted. The air felt lighter, like a storm that had finally passed. I turned to George. "Would you like to say grace tonight?" He hesitated, then nodded. His voice was soft as he began. "For the ones we've lost," he said, "and the ones still finding their way back home." I closed my eyes. For the first time in years, I felt peace. But as I opened them again, I saw something glimmering on the table. The old photo, our last Christmas together, the one I'd kept tucked inside my recipe book for years. In it, Michael had his arm around me, Daniel on his lap, all of us smiling, unaware that it would be our last. I traced his face with my fingers. "Merry Christmas, love," I whispered. And in the silence that followed, through the warmth of candlelight and the faint sound of snow, I could have sworn I heard his voice, soft and steady, saying, "You finally let me go." The house was silent again, but not the kind of silence that hurts. It was softer now, almost sacred. The kind of silence that follows after tears have washed something clean. Candlelight flickered gently on the dining table, dancing across the empty plates, the folded napkins, the memories. Outside, snow still fell, layer upon layer, wrapping the world in white. For the first time in years, I wasn't afraid of the quiet. George sat in the armchair by the fire, dozing lightly, his face peaceful in the glow. Emma was in the kitchen, humming softly while packing away leftovers, one hand resting on her stomach. And Daniel, he stood by the window, looking out into the night, his reflection blurred by the snow against the glass. I walked to him quietly, my steps slow, deliberate. When I reached his side, I could see his eyes, red but calm. He looked at me and smiled faintly. "I was scared to tell you," he said. "About Dad. About everything." I placed my hand on his arm. "And now?" He looked back out at the snow. "Now I just feel lighter. Like he's finally where he's supposed to be. And so are we." I followed his gaze, the street outside, the pale glow of Christmas lights from the neighbors' houses, the world still moving on, as it always does. For years, I had felt like time had stopped for me on the night my husband's car never came back. But standing here beside my son, I realized it hadn't. It had only been waiting for me to catch up. I turned to him. "You know," I said softly, "I used to set a place for your father every year. I thought it was how I'd keep him close. But tonight, I think I finally understood. Keeping someone close doesn't mean holding on. It means remembering without breaking." Daniel smiled faintly, nodding. "He'd be proud of you, Mom." I smiled back, not the hollow smile I'd worn for years, but something real. Something warm. "Maybe I'm finally proud of me too," I said. We stood there for a while, just watching the snow. It fell thick and endless, but gentle, like forgiveness. When Emma called us back to the table for dessert, I noticed she'd set out an extra plate, not in front of an empty chair, but in the center, beside the candles. "For him," she said simply. "So he's part of tonight, not missing from it." Something in my chest cracked open again, but this time, it wasn't pain. It was gratitude. We all sat down. George woke up with a small grunt and smiled tiredly when he saw the plate. "You've got your mother's heart, Daniel," he said quietly. Daniel reached across and took his grandfather's hand. Maybe it's time we stop running from it. The fire crackled, the candles glowed, and for the first time, laughter, quiet, hesitant, but real, began to fill the house again. After dinner, Daniel and Emma went upstairs to rest. George was still by the fire, lost in thought. I went to the window once more and looked out, the snow now knee-deep in the garden, the world still and bright under the moonlight. I opened the old wooden chest near the window. Inside were the letters, years of unopened Christmas cards from friends, neighbors, even Michael's old coworkers. I'd never read them. I couldn't bear to. Tonight, I finally did. One by one, I opened them, messages of love, sympathy, stories about how my husband used to bring coffee to the office for everyone, how he fixed the neighbor's mailbox in the middle of winter. Little pieces of him I'd forgotten to remember. And at the bottom of the chest, there was one more envelope, unmarked, yellowed, sealed. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside was a letter, his handwriting. Evelyn, if you ever find this, it means I didn't get to tell you what I should have told you every day, I love you. Not the easy kind of love that fits neatly between arguments and chores, but the stubborn kind that survives all of it. I know I've failed you. I know I've failed myself. But I hope you remember the best of me, not the broken parts. Don't keep my chair empty. Fill it with life. With laughter. With the people who'll carry what we built forward. Love doesn't disappear, Evie. It just changes rooms. Michael. The words blurred through my tears. I pressed the letter to my chest and sank to my knees, sobbing softly, not in despair this time, but in release. All these years, I had been waiting for a voice I thought I'd never hear again. And tonight, through paper and ink, through silence and snow, he had finally spoken. George found me there a few minutes later. He knelt beside me, his old hand steady on my shoulder. He always loved you, he whispered. I think I just needed to hear it too. I nodded, unable to speak. He helped me up, and we placed the letter on the mantel, beside a small candle and a framed photo of Michael. The flame flickered, catching the gold frame just right, as if it was winking in the firelight. I smiled through my tears. Merry Christmas, Michael, I whispered. You can rest now. The next morning, sunlight spilled through the curtains, bright and golden. The snow had stopped. The world outside glittered like glass. Emma came down first, wrapped in a robe, her belly round and glowing. Good morning, she said, smiling. The baby's kicking again. Strong one, I said, grinning. Just like his grandfather. Daniel followed soon after, rubbing his eyes, hair messy. Coffee, he offered. Always, I said. As he handed me the mug, I noticed the photo still on the mantel, the candle burned down to a stub, the letter beside it. And for the first time, the sight didn't ache. It just warmed. George joined us, cane in hand, looking frail but lighter than I'd ever seen him. He looked at me with a small nod, a quiet truce. We sat together in the living room, the four of us, talking about names, plans, memories, small, ordinary things that felt miraculous after years of silence. The world outside was new again. Clean. Forgiven. That night, after everyone had gone to bed, I walked outside one last time. The air was crisp and cold, the stars like scattered glass. I looked up and whispered, you were right, love. I kept your chair empty too long. But I filled it tonight, with family, laughter, forgiveness. And it finally feels like home again. A single snowflake drifted down, landing on my hand. It melted instantly. And in that fleeting touch, I felt him, just enough to know he'd never really left. I turned back toward the glowing windows of the house, warm, alive, full of voices, and smiled. This story reminds us that love isn't measured by words or memories, it's proven by respect, understanding, and forgiveness. Sometimes, the people we sacrifice everything for forget the weight of our silence, the pain behind our smiles, and the truth behind our actions. But life has a way of revealing what the heart hides. It teaches us that grief can blur love, but it can never erase it. Respect for the past is the foundation of every family's future. And no matter how deeply people misunderstand you, the truth always finds its way home, even if it arrives too late. Because at the end of every broken story, there's always one soul who chose love, even when the world offered none in return. Broken Heart.